Welcome back, Year 5. In today's reading lesson, we'll be doing a new story called Silly Jill. We're going to be working on the same focus skill though, making connections. Yesterday you guys did a pretty good job of making connections to help explain your answers. However, I did see that quite a few of you answered the question without backing it up with your connection. So today we're going to dive a little bit deeper and try to understand why making a connection before giving your answer helps to fully explain or justify your response. So yesterday in your independent work, one of the questions was, think of how people often feel about their pets. Why do you think Norman the African gray parrot was always perched on Granddad's bedhead? Now, this question, just like all the others, prompted you at the start to think about something, to get you to make a connection. In this case, it was prompting you to think about how people feel about their pets. So when I stop and think about that, I imagine how some people love their pets so much. They take them everywhere. They carry them in their purse. They dress them up. They feed them special foods. They buy them all these expensive toys. They kind of treat them like their children. So it's pretty normal nowadays for people to really go overboard for their pets because they love them so much. So with that in my mind, I can now form my answer to the question, why do you think Norman the African gray parrot was always perched on Granddad's bedhead? Well, chances are Granddad, like most people in the world, really loves his pet. So perhaps he kept him around everywhere he went. So even when he was asleep, he wanted Norman nearby so Norman would sit on the bedhead. Let's see how I made my answer. I started with my connection. I know that many people love their pets a lot and treat them like members of the family. I made my connection pretty short. I didn't go overboard. I don't need to write paragraphs about it. But I made my point clear. People love their pets. Now let's see how I connected this to my answer. Granddad probably loved Norman his pet parrot a lot and kept him nearby at all times. So Norman probably slept on the bedhead to be near him. Norman probably loved Granddad too and didn't want to be away from him. So now my answer is complete. I've shown how my background knowledge, my connection of how people feel about their pets, supports my answer to this particular question of why Norman was perched on Granddad's bedhead. So it shows that I'm really thinking. That's what is so important about answering these questions. You need to show that you are thinking deeply about the question. So for your independent work today, you're going to be getting questions similar to this that prompt you to make a connection first and then answer the question. I want you to try following the format I have here on the screen. In orange, it's my connection, and then in black, it's a follow-up with my answer. So by putting my connection first, explaining my background knowledge about the topic, it makes my answer make more sense. So then when somebody reads my answer, they say, oh, that's reasonable, I get it, because my connection came before it. All right, let's move on to our silly story. Remember, it's taken from the book of silly stories written by these authors and illustrated by these illustrators. Silly Jill. There was once a girl called Jill Martin, and she always thought she knew best. Once, she took pity on a gorilla at her local zoo. She decided he would much rather live with her than with his wife and babies in the jungle-like park that had been designed especially for them. So one night, she crept into the zoo and lured him out of his lovely cage with bunches of bananas while his family was sleeping. Before we move to the next page, right away, how do you feel about Jill? I kinda don't like her, to be totally honest. She thinks she knows best all the time, and she's trying to get a gorilla to move away from his family when he was perfectly happy where he was. I don't think Jill is very sensible. Let's see what happens next. They caught a night bus back to her house, and when the conductor made a fuss and said it was against the rules to carry huge apes, Jill told him not to be so silly and threatened to report him. But the gorilla would not sit still. He leapt from seat to seat and drummed his chest until the bus shook. The driver called him a public nuisance and drove him straight back to the zoo. Everyone could see he would be much happier there. Except Jill. Whenever anyone tried to stop her from doing anything, Jill would simply reply, "Oh, don't be so silly. I know exactly what I'm doing." She would go ahead and do it, and quite often the results were disastrous. No one tried to stop Jill from doing silly things at home, which made her even worse. She was an only child, and she could do no wrong in the eyes of her mother and father. They spoilt her horribly, and always agreed with everything she said. When Jill's parents took her to the circus for her birthday, and she insisted that she could do the high wire act better than the acrobats, her mother and father just said, "Of course you can, darling." Another child might have told her parents that for a joke and not taken it any further. But Jill was really convinced she could somersault from the trapeze and ride a unicycle across the high wire. Other parents would have tried to stop their child attempting to do anything quite as dangerous. But Jill's parents were just as silly as Jill, so they let her have a go. The ringmaster tried to stop them. He cracked his whip and twirled his mustache furiously, but Jill's parents were determined to let their daughter do what she wanted to do. They were so insistent and offered him so much money that in the end he did. It was bound to end in tears, as anyone could have told Jill. In fact, it ended in tears of laughter. She did everything so horribly wrong it looks like a comedy routine. She flew backwards off the unicycle as it gathered speed along the high wire, looped the loop, and landed in the arms of a clown. She missed the trapeze and flew into the open mouth of the cannon, was shot out again, and finally caught by an acrobat. Everyone cheered and said it was the funniest thing they had ever seen. Jill, of course, never realized the joke was on her. School was a really big problem for Jill. As she always felt she knew best, it was very difficult to teach her anything at all. One day, she read a story in the local paper about a schoolgirl who was so clever at chemistry she had passed all the right exams to go to university and study it with much older people when she was still only 10. "Oh, I could do that," scoffed Jill. "That's nothing." And as usual, her doting parents replied, "Of course you could, darling." Now, chemistry is something you have to be very careful indeed to get exactly right. It was also the subject that Jill was most determined to be much better at than anyone else, in particular better than the pupil who had been such a genius at it. The trouble started at the next chemistry lesson. The rest of the class listened carefully to the chemistry teacher. She explains that in their next experiment it was very important not to mix the wrong liquids. Under no circumstances should blue be mixed with red. "Huh," thought Jill. "I bet it works much better if you mix the blue with the red." And so, without anyone seeing, she mixed blue and red. Bang! Jill's flask exploded the moment they were combined, and a stream of foul-smelling, smoking purple liquid poured onto the carpet. "You silly, silly girl!" shouted the chemistry teacher. "What have you done?" It was difficult to see exactly what Jill had done. The classroom was so full of smoke. But everyone started to feel what she had done almost immediately. "Help!" they shouted, as one by one they felt themselves being lifted off the floor. A most extraordinary thing had happened. The spilt liquid had made the pile of the carpet grow like grass. Only, instead of growing slowly like grass normally does, the carpet was growing upwards in leaps and bounds, like a meadow that had gone mad. "Make for the door!" screamed the chemistry teacher, as the long waving pile of the classroom carpet carried them all up towards the ceiling. It was rather like being on a roller coaster. So they all did, even Jill. They crawled across the narrow space that was still left as fast as they could, trying not to knock their heads on the lights, while the whole carpet shot upwards in a great mass. Then, just before they reached the door, the carpet flowered. Fat buds burst out into brightly colored blooms. Everyone who suffered from hay fever spluttered and sneezed. Luckily, the classroom door was open. They squeezed their way through it before the carpet filled the room and then tumbled out into the corridor, chasing the last pupils out of the door. "Run for it!" commanded the teacher, pressing the fire alarm to alert the rest of the school. And 800 pupils, including Jill, 30 members of staff, the caretaker, and the cat raced for the safety of the playground, just before the school was completely swallowed up by carpet. It took every fireman in the town a week to cut the carpet down, and for months afterwards it still sprouted the occasional flower. The school had to be closed, of course, while the giant carpet was scythed, mowed, rolled, and finally brought under control. The head teacher was furious with Jill when she heard how it had all started. "Your silly, thoughtless behavior could have destroyed my school and everyone in it," she told her. "I hope this has taught you a lesson, and you know now that you do not always know better than anyone else." fortunately for Jill and the school, it had taught her a lesson that she never forgot. From that dreadful day onwards, she stopped insisting she knew best, and to everyone's relief, there were no more disasters. In fact, Jill's terrible mistake turned out to be a fantastic opportunity for the school. An army chief heard about Jill's silly experiment and the amazing result. He decided that a quick-growing carpet would be an excellent weapon. He paid the school a lot of money for the details of Jill's purple mixture. This meant that the school was able to build a swimming pool, ice rink, and bowling center for everyone in the town. And it wasn't long before Jill mended her ways and really did become a star pupil. But everyone still knew her as Silly Jill. And that's the end of today's story. I quite like this one because at the start of the story, I don't like Jill at all. I think she's a nuisance, like the bus driver said. A nuisance means somebody who kind of gets on your nerves and causes problems. But by the end, I'm glad that she learned her lesson and never continued that kind of behavior. At the same time, it was quite funny too, all of the things that she did. I wonder if you made any connections while we read this story. Do you know anyone like Jill? Or have you personally learned from a mistake that you made in the past? Well, let's see our independent work and what connections we can make. So today you have another 3 questions for your independent work. The first, think about animals that live in zoos. Do you think it was right for Jill to break the ape out, or should she have left him alone? For this question, you also need to think about what they said in the text about the ape and his living situation. Number 2, think about how your parents discipline you. Why do you think Jill was so out of control at the start of the story? Now, when I say discipline, I just mean how do your parents teach you what's right and what's wrong? In the picture off to the side, that could get your brain going about what you might want to include in your connection. And number 3, how do you think Jill's classmates and teachers felt towards her? For this one, I have not prompted you to think about something. However, making a connection will definitely help you with answering this question. Something that popped into my mind is Veruca Salt from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. She's in that picture that you see off to the side. Veruca reminds me a lot of Jill. So that's really a text-to-text connection because Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a book. And Veruca was spoiled rotten and her parents let her do whatever she wanted, and she ended up suffering the consequences. Also, the other kids around her and the adults around her couldn't stand her because they felt she was so spoiled. So I think I can apply what I saw in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to what I'm seeing in this story about Jill. Now remember, the most important thing for your independent work today is that you make a connection. So just like I started my answers with my connection, you need to do the same. Be sure to write in full sentences and check your spelling. And then, as always, you take a picture and send it to me. All right, Year 5. Oh, before I forget, remember, on days when you have reading on YouTube, you should also be doing some work on IXL English. I've only seen a few of you logging in, so make sure you get on IXL English today. All right, stay safe and I'll see you soon.